Okay, just out of respect for everyone's time, we're going to get started, even though many people are still coming online. My name's Sarah Lefton. I'm the Chief Development Officer at UJA Federation in Toronto. And I just want to thank everyone for taking the time in the middle of their day and on short notice for joining. This is truly an issue that definitely goes well beyond Toronto. It impacts all of Canadian Jews. And so we have on the call today not just the Toronto Jewish community, but we've invited all the federations from across Canada to send it out to their communities as well. So thank you all for joining. And we're really grateful to be joined by Noah Shack, who's the CEO of CJA, the Center for Israel and Jewish Affairs, to talk to us today. It was really important for both Noah and for the Federation leadership across the country that we did something really quickly and created an opportunity for people to come together, because we're all feeling more than unsettled, but really concerned and want to understand how we got here, what the implications are of the announcement yesterday, and also what we can do moving forward. And so Noah's going to spend some time talking with us today, and I've asked that we allocate quite a bit of time to answering as many questions as possible, to provide as much information as we possibly can, and to give everyone a sense of what we can do in the days ahead. Just quickly before I turn it over to Noah, for those who are unfamiliar with CJA, what makes CJA slightly unique is that it's not just an agency that's funded by the federations. It's actually a formal part of the federation system across Canada. And what CJA does is actually quite specific. It really is an agency that is focused on impacting the decisions at all three levels of government across the country and other sort of public policy institutions. And so CJA really does act as an ongoing voice to decision makers. And they're also here in a moment like this to try to relay information in a very timely way about what we can interpret from what we're hearing from government stakeholders. And I think that is, can be done in part through email, but frankly, a webinar forum or something like this is a much better forum to dig into some of the nuance that we saw yesterday and some of the language that was put out and what we need to do, moving forward. So Noah's going to unpack all these issues shortly and also talk a little bit about broadly what's happening in community advocacy. And we'll hear a lot about the fact that right now, through the federations, through CJA, and frankly, through many other organizations and grassroots organizations across the country, this is a moment where we're really hoping that everyone can stand together, everyone can understand that we will be better if we can focus our efforts on the task at hand. And it's just an all hands on deck moment. We all need to be making phone calls. We all need to be sending emails. We all need to be as active as possible. And for those who have been volunteering, for those who have been getting involved in public policy way before this situation, we thank you. And we are obviously here to help you in the days ahead if you're looking for a way to get involved. So I'm going to turn it over to Noah, but just to say that please save your questions. You'll see at the very bottom of the webinar that there's a tab for questions and a chat. Feel free to populate that with things as they come up. I'm going to try to consolidate questions as much as possible and sort of establish themes to get them asked so we can get through as much as we can. If we don't get to a question that you want answered, we are going to provide in the chat, my colleague's going to share an email address that you can send your questions into, and we will make sure that you get a response. You can send to info@jewishtoronto.com. And even if you are not from Toronto, we will still make sure to consolidate all of the questions, get them to CJA, and just note in your email what community you're from, and we'll make sure that everything is sort of put together and answered. So don't stress if we don't get to your question on this particular call. So Noah, I'm going to turn it over to you. Thank you so much for joining us today. I know, and for those who don't know Noah, he brings decades of experience in advocacy, really incredibly deep knowledge, both of the Middle East and of the Canadian political system. And I'm thrilled that you are on the call and able to guide us in how we move forward. So Noah, over to you.
Thanks, Sarah, and I appreciate the opportunity to speak with everyone here today. I'm going to try to keep my remarks brief because I know that there are a lot of questions, and I want to hear from you because, as Sarah mentioned, we really do have to move forward together in partnership. I am extremely frustrated with where things currently stand, as I know many of you are. And we need to be in a position where we are directing our collective frustration together where it can have most impact. And I'll speak a little bit more about that a little later on. I do also recognize this is a very open call, and so there's a lot more that I'd like to convey, but not knowing exactly who's listening, I'm going to give you a high-level overview of where we were, where we are, and where we're going, and articulate elements of our plan that I can on this call, and invite those questions from you, to which I'll respond, and hopefully an ongoing conversation beyond this webinar. A couple weeks ago, before we were in this new reality with Canada announcing its intention to recognize a Palestinian state, Canada was in a fairly strong position relative to our European allies, where our Prime Minister had stated that a Palestinian state would not just have to live in peace and security with Israel and mutual recognition, but would effectively have to be a Zionist state. And he didn't just say that privately to us, he said it publicly on an interview with CNN at the NATO summit. This was the strongest position articulated by one of these Western democratic leaders, and had us in a fairly good position in terms of where our country was headed. That was followed up with reports that the UK and Canada were actively urging France not to move forward with recognition, France being the most vociferous advocate for the immediate recognition of Palestinian statehood. Late last week, France announced recognition without condition. And a couple of days ago, the UK issued a threat that it would recognize Palestinian statehood subject to conditions placed on the Israeli government. Once the UK slipped, it was clear to us there would be an incredible amount of pressure on the Canadian government to follow suit. And we began moving beyond our usual advocacy engagement, direct engagement with government, to begin to mobilize our community to raise its voice as well. And in a very short period of time, more than 5,000 of you sent your messages to the Prime Minister's office, along with countless phone calls from people throughout our community across the country, to the Prime Minister, to ministers, to caucus members, making it absolutely clear where the Jewish community stood on this issue. Yesterday, in the Prime Minister's announcement, he mentioned that the Government of Canada intends to recognize a state of Palestine at the UN General Assembly in September. And I'll use his words here because I think it's important that we're clear exactly what this means, that this intention is predicated on the Palestinian Authority's commitment to much needed reforms, including the commitments by Palestinian Authority President Abbas to fundamentally reform its governance, to hold general elections in 2026 in which Hamas can play no part, and to demilitarize the Palestinian state. So the intention to recognize statehood is predicated on commitments made by the Palestinian Authority and its president, Mahmoud Abbas, to reform governance, hold elections in 2026, which do not include Hamas, and to demilitarize this Palestinian state. This begs a whole bunch of questions, given how vague these commitments are, and also the ability of the Palestinian Authority to implement them anyway, and the credibility, the fundamental lack of credibility of Palestinian Authority President Abbas, who's notorious for failing to follow through on international commitments, for his corruption, his lack of democratic accountability. I think he's in the 20th year of entering the 20th year of a 4-year term, and financing of terrorism, to say nothing of the lack of legitimacy that he has in Palestinian society. So there's a lot of questions about how Canada can be moving forward with a policy change that is predicated on a commitment that doesn't seem to hold a lot of water. Now, I do want to dig into an element where there's been some confusion in the community. The Prime Minister's statement yesterday also included a reiteration of Canadian policy that Hamas must immediately release all the hostages taken on October 7th, that Hamas must disarm, and that Hamas must play no role in the future governance of Palestine. Um, that was stated as a clear articulation of Canadian policy with regard to Hamas and Gaza, but it is not included in the list of items on which Canada's intention to recognize Palestinian statehood is predicated. And I think that underscores another challenge that we have with this recognition and the way that it's being pursued. Conceivably, we will have Canada recognize a Palestinian state while hostages are still held in the terror dungeons of Gaza by Hamas that has not yet been uprooted from that part of the world and is still ostensibly the party in power. So this is a fundamental challenge. How can an agreement that's ostensibly, or a position that's ostensibly there to drive peace and move things forward, not be predicated on dealing with the current source of conflict? This is another challenge that needs to be addressed with the government's announcement yesterday. We are continuing our push to government officials, to leaders in the Prime Minister's office, ministers, MPs, working hand in hand with community volunteers and community members who are also actively involved in the political sector. We have been pushing our messages out through media and working in partnership with allies who have been reinforcing that message. And I do want to take the moment here to acknowledge the campaign that's been launched by Allies for a Strong Canada, which is calling on Canadians beyond where there are usual interactions with the Jewish community to get involved in advocating on this issue on the basis of it putting wind in the sails of the mobs that have been spewing hate throughout Canada over the last 2 years. And I think if there are people who you think who are not members of the Jewish community but are allies and want to do something about this, I'd encourage you to connect them with Allies for a Strong Canada around this initiative. But it can't just be about what Siege is doing. Governments need to hear not just from lobbyists and insiders. They need to see concretely that the frustration, the outrage, the questions that we have as a community and the direction we need government to go isn't just coming from a select few, but is a reflection of a community movement, that this is actually what the Jewish community wants and needs to see out of government moving forward. Is, as Sarah mentioned, now's the time for our community to come together and speak with a unified voice. I don't think you'll ever have the Jewish community speaking with one voice, but at least to be speaking in unison, in a symphony, in a way that we can come together to make it clear. Letters are important, and I encourage everybody to participate in our email campaign that we launched before the decision was undertaken. But they're not enough. This evening, you'll all be receiving an email, and if you want to check it out also online at our Action Hub, actionhub.ca, there'll be an email going out to expand on this on our letter writing campaign for everybody to be making phone calls to MPs across the country and ask for meetings with your MPs. And we are going to be supporting you every step of the way with a sustained campaign to have ordinary community members organize meetings with MPs across Canada to ask tough questions of their elected representatives and ensure that we're holding them accountable for decisions that are undertaken and getting the answers that we need and pushing the government to consider whether these conditions that they've set can actually be met, or does basing this on commitments from Abbas and the PA put the cart before the horse? Do we need to see real change on the ground before we're willing to make changes to Canadian policy? beyond meeting with elected officials and speaking with them and sharing your thoughts, views, and feelings organically from your heart, it's so important that each and every one of us is deliberately engaging with our allies. We are 1% of the population. We are tiny. And even if every single one of us is speaking up in an organized and concerted way, we need others to join that chorus in order for us to be effective. And yes, there are people out there who are already ready, already doing it, already raising their voices, and that's really important. But we need to cultivate more people to join with us. And there's a lot of people out there who support us, who recognize that this is flawed, not just in terms of from a Jewish Canadian perspective, but from a Canadian perspective, that this is not the direction that our country should be going. And I can't underscore enough the power of real, authentic interactions. People speaking out with our community don't come out of nowhere. Um, Often I'll speak to some of these people, and the story they tell me is about an interaction, a formative interaction that they had with a Jewish friend, a Jewish neighbor, a Jewish colleague. And what starts off as a small interaction can cascade and build towards a really important relationship through which our allies feel empowered to speak up, to speak their mind, and to join us in this cause. And so, whether it's just having a conversation with somebody who you're close with, inviting them over for a Shabbat dinner where you can talk about these issues and why they're important to you. Most people are not going to speak up because of uh, how much they care about Canadian foreign policy, but they will speak up because of how much they care about you. And so I really do encourage people, in addition to taking part in initiatives to speak to elected officials, to continue our efforts to grow the base of support, the vocal base of support for our community and our values and Canadian values every step of the way. Beyond that, I really also want to hear from everybody out there. CEJA has a lot of experience. We have a lot of innovative ideas and new ways of going about solving this challenge, which you'll learn more about in the coming weeks. But we don't have all the answers, and I want to hear if somebody has a great idea. We're always looking to innovate. So if you have an idea about how we can affect change for the community, we're all ears, and I want to hear from you. Because what starts as just an idea could really grow into a major program that our community can run with. And we want to be here to help empower and support the totality of our community, again, to speak in unison, in symphony, to drive forward our community agenda with a unified voice. Sarah, with that, I'll turn it back to you, and we can take a look at some of the questions that are coming through.
Perfect. Thanks so much, Noah. Really appreciate it. Just before we dive in, I know you made a couple of comments earlier about just how we are interpreting the statement and the language in the statement. We have quite a few questions that are pouring in just about whether or not there are actual conditions that the Canadian government is putting on recognition of statehood. And if there's anything that we can do as a Canadian Jewish community, or what CEJA will be doing to push the government to have hard conditions if they're moving forward in this direction, and also a lot of questions on who might monitor these conditions and whether or not the conditions are being met. So anything you can just sort of first share about how we're interpreting the language, because it was quite nuanced, as I said before, and why we're interpreting it that way, and then what we can do to put pressure on the government to make to hold them accountable moving forward.
So we have to do all of that. There's no incentive really to police Abbas on following through on these commitments. And we've seen time and again innumerable excuses for why the Palestinian Authority has not been able to meet different commitments along the way. In fact, just today, the U.S. State Department put Palestinian Authority and PLO officials on their sanctions list for failing to live up to obligations. So there's a strong record of them failing to do so, and I think that's one of the fundamental flaws of the approach taken by the Canadian government, that they're relying on essentially a promise from Mahmoud Abbas that he will move forward with reforms, democratic reforms, that he'll call elections that Hamas can't participate in, and that he'll demilitarize. Um, uh, he hasn't been able to deliver on any of those things up to this point, and there's no indication that he will be able to deliver on any of those things going forward. And making Canada's change in foreign policy contingent on faith that he will, I think, is misplaced. We need to hold the government accountable for making sure that there actually is real change before Canadian foreign policy changes to meet that. Um, uh, it's also imperative that we get clarity from the government uh, how this connects with their stated policy objective of having the hostages returned and Hamas removed from Gaza. Because the way that it was communicated yesterday, those two things are not linked. And that is an essential ingredient. So we're going to continue to lobby. We're going to continue to mobilize community to raise its voice, along with volunteers from across the country who are active politically, and ensure that we are pressing as hard as possible for those and other fundamental questions to be answered by the government in order to force them to deliver on those fundamental things for Canadians.
Thanks, Noah. Also, a lot of questions coming in about what this means for funding for UNRWA. And I don't even know if we have that information yet, because I think there are obviously so many issues that need to be explored beyond just recognition of the state. But any intel on that?
Well, I can tell you that the new funding that was announced over the weekend at the conference in New York was not earmarked for UNRWA. And since actually CJA launched its legal intervention to take the government to court over funding UNRWA, there have not been additional allocations of funding to that organization announced. The question with the new funding is some of it has been announced for the PA. And there are serious questions. Canada has not funded the PA directly to this point. And there are questions about whether what accountability mechanisms will be in place for that funding to ensure that it doesn't find its way either through corruption and graft to line the pockets of crooked leaders or more worrisome to the Palestinian Authorities' so-called pay for slay program, where they fund terrorists who are incarcerated in jail. So this is a concerning element, but in terms of UNRWA, there's been no indication of additional funding going to UNRWA at this point.
Not so much additional funding, but if they actually do achieve statehood, then lose refugee status, right? So
Yeah.
potentially then, I mean, I think that's where more of the questions were coming, which is, do we, and it might just be too early for that conversation, but
Yeah, I think let's see if they do recognize statehood. There's a whole bunch of considerations that come about from that. Our objective right now is to have the government reconsider whether recognizing a Palestinian state before there is a Palestinian state living side by side in security and safety and mutual recognition with Israel, a Zionist Palestinian state, as the Prime Minister articulated, is a wise move forward. Given that at present it looks like it will only further entrench the current conflict and embolden Hamas.
So Noah, many questions coming in, and totally understandable, about how we ended up here, like how we got into this situation, what our relationship is right now with the government, and the Prime Minister's office in particular, and the Prime Minister in particular. What kinds of discussions have taken place until now? Many comments about whether advocacy initiatives that have been launched have been effective, whether they've been listening, whether they've been reaching out to us, whether they've been engaging with Jewish community, whether we could have done more earlier, like all of these different kinds of questions about, frankly, our advocacy strategy and whether it was enough. Whether they've been open to any conversation, if there's something that we can be doing differently moving forward. But anything that you can share, I think, on I'll say lessons learned, but it's also about, frankly, what we knew and what we didn't know and what we've been taken by surprise, where we've been taken by surprise. I think would be really helpful for everybody on the call, because it also just helps us really understand why we're in this situation at the moment, given how much that we've all been doing to raise our voice.
Oh, this was an about face from ongoing private and public conversations and messages from the government, from Carney personally and from the PMO, and really was a surprise flowing from the UK recognition announcement. I think it's telling that in the press conference yesterday, one of the journalists said, "Yesterday you indicated you wouldn't do this. Today you're announcing that you're doing it." Um, uh, do you have any comment on that? This is something that developed extraordinarily quickly and really due to international dynamics. And we were taken by surprise on this, and there are lessons to be learned from that, and we will be looking at how we might have done things differently. But right now, our focus is on what we need to do right now to set ourselves up and our community up for success as we go through the next month. And as the deadline approaches for the Prime Minister to decide whether to follow through on this intention that he's announced, or whether those conditions that he articulated are just not feasible and not something that he can move forward with.
So I think many people who are on this call are more engaged than the average population because you're taking time out of the middle of your day to learn more and understand where we're at and what you can do. So I'm going to guess that there are a number of people on this call who are already involved, either with different levels of government or speaking with media or writing to different decision makers or engaging allies and things like that. If you're not, these are all things, as Noah suggested, that we absolutely want to be doing. There are a couple links that have already been shared in the chat, and it's, we'll go through them again before we close the call, but please circulate with your networks. Noah, questions about some of the tactics used are coming up. So we understand that there are emails, and that is something that is perhaps a lower barrier to entry, like an easier thing for people to do. My hope is that people will make phone calls, people will get to know their elected officials and actually make meetings with them, particularly those who aren't aligned or on side, or frankly understand the threat that we share with Canadians. This is not just a threat to Jews, it's a threat to Canadians and anyone who shares sort of free value, who shares our values of freedom and democracy, and frankly wants to fight terror. So we need to make that case known, and we need everyone on this call and our networks to make that case known. Noah, questions about how we reach out to media. So we know we reach out to government through meetings, both meetings through official channels and people who are doing this professionally, but also volunteers and grassroots leaders who are reaching out on their own, sometimes with us. All of the above are great. But how are we dealing with media on this? And is there a reason why we're not sort of waking up and holding, daily press conferences and things like this to really have our voices amplified?
So right now we're in the middle of a news cycle where there's a lot of attention on this, and we've been doing a lot of media over the last 24 hours, and there's another full day today where there's a lot of attention. We are planning to use press conferences to generate additional attention once that initial interest wanes. So press conferences are an opportunity to bring the media together to focus attention and regenerate it once the news cycle has moved on and people are paying attention to other things. So it is a tactic that we do deploy and that we will deploy. And I don't want to share in this forum, when it's planned for and what it's going to highlight. But rest assured, there is a plan in the next short while to be using that particular tactic alongside many others. I mean, the bottom line is, we have to generate as much attention and pressure on this and make it clear that this is something that matters. Not just this, all of our issues in a big way. That's the new world we're living in. The era of lobbyists meeting with decision makers in smoke-filled rooms and having a private conversation that changes policy is no longer the effective way of doing it. I don't think there are smoke-filled rooms anymore. I think that's illegal. But on a serious note, we need to go all in as a community, and that's part of the reason we've launched this new Action Hub, this new functionality to enable people to make phone calls, to book meetings easily. And we will be launching an additional initiative to make it even easier for people to come together in groups and do those face-to-face engagements with parliamentarians across the country, because that is just mission critical right now for our elected officials to be hearing from us consistently and constantly, and not just from us on this side of the webinar, but from us, everybody who's tuned into this issue, particularly in the middle of a day, as Sarah mentioned.
Thanks, Noah. So in a minute, I'm going to turn us to questions that are coming in about the situation in Gaza. But before we do, I think many on the call likely saw President Trump's statement this morning, saying that essentially it'll make it very hard for the US to reach a trade agreement with Canada because of their commitment to recognizing a Palestinian state. Noah, thoughts about this? Is there any way for us to somehow get involved south of the border? Is that something that's within sort of CJA's mandate? Is it something that individuals should be doing? Do you think it's going to have an impact on the situation and, frankly, Canadian government decision making on this?
Well, I don't think we need to get involved. The president seems like he's seized of this issue, and this is an American thing. We're focused here in Canada as Jewish Canadians. The president's comment has generated a lot of attention, and I think reinforces, you mentioned before, this is really fundamentally about Canadian values and how we are acting as a country. The notion that we've placed this symbolic recognition of statehood on the table, to that in a way that could jeopardize the thing that is most important right now, which is our trade relationship with the United States, I think is bringing it into sharp relief for people in a way that they otherwise might not be paying attention. So it's a good opportunity to engage with allies on this right now. All that to be said, the day that we found out this was going to be happening, I was on the phone the day that Starmer actually announced that he was moving forward, and we realized that Canada was likely going to face that tipping point pressure. I was on the phone with my counterparts in France, in the UK, in the United States, in Germany, and a number of other countries, sharing with one another what was transpiring in their governments with regard to this issue, and collaborating on how we were going to resolve this, not as a conspiracy, but as colleagues trying to solve a problem that's not just local, it's global. And I think that's a really important thing for people to know. And I hope that gives some reassurance in this really difficult and challenging time, that there is that collaboration across countries, across communities, and that we are working together. Obviously, there are differences between the Jewish communities and perspectives in different countries and approaches, but we are having that dialogue, those conversations, and informing one another of what's happening, and trying to support one another every step of the way to achieve our shared objectives.
Thanks. You know what? I'm going to ask one more question on this that's been coming in different iterations before we move to the situation in Israel, and also some questions about the current situation in Gaza. Noah, just comment a little bit on the effectiveness of rallies and protests. Lots of questions about why we're not calling, not just calling for, but also organizing rallies and protests across the country right now.
So I think we will be calling for gatherings across the country as we roll out a plan over the next month leading into the UN season in September. But these are blunt instruments that we need to deploy at the right time in the right place in order to have impact. And so I think they are a valid tool for us, particularly as I mentioned before, in the same way that a press conference can generate some media attention, getting a group of people together to demonstrate can garner some media attention and influence the public discourse. And that's an important thing. Just doing a rally on its own is a one and done, and has limited impact. So I think it's not a question of why we aren't doing rallies or why people shouldn't do rallies, but how we can best integrate gatherings, large and small, in a way that fits within a broader sustained campaign that can drive change and have results.
Thank you. Okay, now I'm going to shift a little bit to what's taking place there. So Noah, I'm just wondering, again, as you might imagine, lots of questions coming in about what we've learned about what's taking place on the ground in Gaza. I think there's a lot of misinformation that we've seen both in the mainstream media that's quite terrifying and shocking and paints a very particular picture that obviously has not been helpful for us, both for government, but also for our own safety as Jews and community. Do you want to just comment a little bit about what you know is taking place on the ground in Gaza at the moment with respect to humanitarian aid and the distribution of that aid?
Well, there's a photo that our foreign minister posted this morning of Canadian aid being airdropped out of a Jordanian plane. So we have photographic evidence of Canadian aid being delivered today. Look, there have been so many conflicting reports, so many confusing reports about what's actually happening on the ground. People saying that everyone is starving, people saying that no one is starving, and it's hard to really understand what's happening. And the videos that are coming out, it's not really clear what ones to conclude. I spoke with our ambassador in Israel 2 days ago to ask her, what's actually happening on the ground? What's her observation as Canada's top diplomat in the country? And she agreed with me that there were a lot of conflicting reports and it was difficult to ascertain what's up, what's down. But that what she was hearing from people on the ground was that, yes, the aid is in Gaza. The Israelis were not blocking the aid from being distributed, but they weren't, at the same time, they weren't stopping their military operations in order to create safety for the delivery of that aid. And so the aid agencies were not willing to go out and make those deliveries while there was ongoing shelling, and they were concerned about the safety of their workers and the ability to deliver the aid. Um, you know, that seems to me like a pretty reasonable take on what's going on the ground. And subsequent to that conversation, of course, the Israelis have opened up tactical pauses for aid to be delivered, and unblocking that situation on the ground. And I think that's something that's important to note. And I'm glad that the government of Canada has acknowledged that aid is being delivered, that Canadian aid is being delivered, because there's a lot of misinformation out there that no aid is being delivered, and that I think we can categorically say is false.
Thanks, Noah. I think we only have time for one more question. We were supposed to keep this to 30 minutes. We're at 40. I'm going to ask Noah if we can do one more here, which really focuses on allies. And I think so much of the time, and understandably, we are concerned as Jews, and we're speaking so much to ourselves. And how do we actually encourage our own community to reach out beyond? We've talked about Allies for a Strong Canada. There are other incredible groups out there, both grassroots and institutions, who are really focusing on reaching out beyond, I'll call it, our internal conversations with one another. And that's more important now than ever. And so Noah referenced earlier Allies for a Strong Canada and a big sort of advocacy campaign that they launched this morning, along with some other allies initiatives. You can see that link in the chat. Please circulate that with your networks. But Noah, anything else that we're doing to build coalitions with other faith and ethnic groups who frankly share the exact same threat as we do? Where are they at? How are they feeling? What kinds of conversations are taking place with them?
So we are engaging with leaders from a whole range of faith and ethnic communities. Particularly, there's been follow-up from the recent gathering of Christian leaders and Jewish leaders from across the country that took place in Toronto just a few short weeks ago, with a commitment to stamp out anti-Semitism across Canada. And you'll see more from leading allies across the country in the coming days and weeks as we move forward with this. But I have to stress that the voices of leaders are important, but the voices of congregants are equally important, if not more important, because it's so important for, I keep saying important, it's critical for our government interlocutors to understand that there are communities of people who care about this. And it's not just a small community that potentially could be ignored. It's something that cuts to the quick for many people across this country. And so if you do have people who are not Jewish but are looking for ways to engage and take part, the Allies Initiative is a great way to do it. And if you know a leader of a faith or ethnocultural community who wants to join the growing list of faith and ethnocultural leaders who are part of this movement, please reach out to us, and we'd be happy to engage with them.
Thanks, Noah. So just a few closing notes. I think, the most important thing now is that we need to stand together with our allies because rightfully, we are very concerned as a community. I think our allies who are engaged are very concerned as well. We should be raising our voices. Please reach out if you need help with messaging, if you need help with a template, if you need help with absolutely anything. You can send a note either to CJA directly or to the email address that we've shared a few times in the chat, info@jewishtoronto.com. We're happy to help. If you don't know how to respond to an issue and you're looking for some background, send us a note. We're happy to help you. If you want to get together with a group of grassroots activists and you have questions on why we're doing something in one way versus another way, we are one email away. I mean, often I will see that a group of community members are having conversations among themselves about why we're doing something, why we're not doing something, and inferring a reason. We are happy to share in a smaller format than a webinar with thousands of people our thinking and frankly, the data that underpins our thinking about why we're doing something. So please reach out. I'm happy to either reach out to you personally or have someone on our team reach out to you. But I think that open lines of communication between concerned community members and CJA and Federation, your local federation at this moment, are so, so important because we need to stand together. We really, really do. It's not a time for us to be having internal division. We need to be united. So please reach out. We are here to help. We're here to explain, help. I say explain why we're doing what we're doing. We're here to learn also from what you might bring to the table because many of you have phenomenal suggestions and have been also engaged in different ways. And you can share with us what's been working as well. So please do that. Encourage people to get involved. We'll continue to share out information as we get it. You'll see the work we're doing with allies across the country, and you'll also see these action alerts going out that Noah's referred to. But, this is the beginning of a new process. Noah made the point, and I'm hoping that everyone heard this clearly earlier, that there was an about face done by the government were the terms that he used. We didn't know we didn't know that we would be in this situation because many of the conversations we'd had up until now had not indicated that we would be sitting here having this conversation today. But we need to keep going. We can't stop. And really at this point, it's not to say that we won't go and learn from what we've done in the past. We always do, and we will continue to. But where from here, we need to keep going and we need to stand together and we need to be loud. So please stay tuned. Look out in your email inboxes for things that you can do. And we're here. We're here to engage in conversation, to answer questions, and to help support you and other groups as you also add your voice to this. So thank you, Noah. Thank you, everyone, for joining. We will stay strong and we will continue to voice our concern.
Thanks, Sarah.
Bye, everybody.